I don't know if the word disidentify is really skillful, because then who's doing the disidentifying? There's intention to disidentify with the intention, right?
Yeah.
So it gets a little tricky, doesn't it? Yeah, I think what's really happening here is just recognition. So when we're being mindful, when we're being the awareness that knows what's arising, whether we call that arising an external or internal arising, its only function is recognition. There's no intention, there's no will, there's no ambition. It just recognizes what's there. And so what I've noticed, and I imagine what you'll notice as well, is as the practice becomes more refined, there are these increasingly subtle aspects of the mind. And for those of us just beginning out, this is actually quite recommended, that there's some effort to continually be directing attention towards ourselves, because again, our habit, if we really reflect on how we exist every day, it's not like that. We're very rarely truly aware of ourselves, aware of our bodies and our minds and our thoughts. We spend most of our time feeling as though we are our thinking, identified with it, like we are that voice in our heads, and we're in here looking out at the world. So the practice is to continually be checking that. And the way to check that is whenever, there's these reminders all the time of whenever we wake up to mindfulness, it's, okay, I see the outside world, but am I seeing myself too? And we're directing attention inwardly at the body and even at the mind. And you'll probably find that there's no difference between those two things eventually. At first, there seems to be a difference. It seems like there's a body that's physical and there's a mind that's created by this thing. Little by little, we start to see that those two things they're not really separate. But at first, there's a lot of effort involved. It's because the habit is so strong to be our thinking, to be identified with that thinking, that we just continually have to. It's almost like training a puppy, where you just told it to sit half a second ago and it's already running around peeing on something. Then you tell it to sit again and then 2 seconds. I mean, it's like that, where we're just continually trying to take attention that always seems to be in here looking out, and bringing it so that it's not only looking out but also looking in. Now, as we continue, little by little, is that effort becomes less and less of an effort, where you start to notice that whenever there's identification, yes, there's an effort to notice, to see, to look back at what we think is looking out. And the moment you do that, that's when that identification with thought drops away. So the moment that there's this recognition of the fact that the mind can be completely empty, or at least not identified with thought, that is just the pure recognition of how things actually are. And from there, there's nothing that needs to be done. And that's probably the trickiest part of the practice, because there's just such a strong sense of there's a me in here that's doing stuff, that immediately, even when that drops away for a second, it immediately pops up and says, now what should I be doing? And the answer is nothing. Other than what you'll find is that instead of it being more of this kind of really effortful, taking this attention that always seems to be out there and directing it in, it's more of just like, it becomes more and more subtle, until eventually there's no movement at all. There's literally, you're not doing anything. Thoughts arise, and there's just a thought. And so what? That's natural, right? Or the inner voice is saying something, and then it becomes even more subtle of that feeling. There's a feeling of intention in there, a feeling of like, what should I be doing? It's not even a thought anymore that you can see or hear. It's just like this feeling, right? Of like, what should I be doing? What is the intention right now? And then it's just this increasingly more of just, allowing that to be exactly as it is. There's nothing to do about it. Nothing you need to do. And the more that there's a letting go of any effort and just simply being, the more clear it becomes that this intention, even at the most subtle level, is not ultimately you. And the more that we see all these different aspects of mind as not being necessarily me, but just things that arise in the mind, the more that habit falls away of identifying with them. So this is something that's about as close as I think I can get to it in words. It's something you just have to continue to play with, because it's really tricky. Because I promise you, when you first start really just, when the effort becomes so subtle that then there's no effort at all, there's no movement, there's no direction of attention, there's this habit that says, I got to be doing something. I've got to be doing something. Like, I am practicing, right? What am I practicing? And it becomes more and more subtle, but it's still there. And then eventually, it's just being. And this is something that applies at the deepest levels of the practice. People have been practicing for years and years and years. But even for those of you who are just starting out, I think the easiest and most brilliant explanation of the practice I've ever heard is from a teacher from Thailand named Ajahn Chah, he's not alive anymore. I think he passed away in the 70s. But he never wrote anything down, as most wise people don't. So there's a lot of good reasons not to write things down. But a lot of his talks were recorded. And there's actually a book that people made out of one of his talks. I think it's called a Still Forest Pond, if I remember right, or Still Forest Pool, something like that. And I remember the very first talk, it's literally both the best way to begin the practice and the best way to end the practice, summed up in just a few simple words, where he says something along the lines of, as you read books and you learn more about mindfulness, you'll learn about all these different practices and techniques, and you'll play around with them, and it's all fine and good. But what it all comes down to is just allowing things to be exactly as they are. And that's all my practice is. So I invite you to come over here where it's nice and cool, and there are no problems, because you're comfortable just allowing things to be exactly as they are. And so if that might be helpful to you, is just, as it becomes more and more subtle, it's just, there's nothing to do, there's nothing to attain, there's nowhere to go. Just being is it. That's it. And that will become more and more obvious, and I think there'll be an increasing sense of lightness, not only during the practice that you're calling formal practice, but just during your daily activities of just, things are just fine, just the way that they are. And clearly there are things that we need to take action on that need to be fixed, but it's coming from a different place, right? It's not coming from this habitual reaction of like an emotional upset or being bothered. It's just, this is the way that it is, and for the benefit of me or somebody else, we should change it. But it's a totally different response than how we normally respond, which is just what the mind wants to do is just this continual reaction, which is either I want to get rid of it or I want to keep it and get more of it. And the mind just is always bouncing between those two things. It's all it's ever doing. If you really watch this thing, it's either saying I don't like this and I want to get rid of it, or I like it and I want to keep it and maybe even get more of it. And that's all it's ever doing. But somewhere in between those two things, we can still have a very valid response to things and take appropriate action without having this sense of aversion or real strong attraction or desire. It's just like, hey, this is what needs to be done, so I'm going to do it. Hello, my friend, and thank you for taking a minute to check out this video here at the Mindfulness Edge. I hope that you enjoyed it and found it helpful. Please feel free to leave any questions that you have about the practice down in the comment section below. if you think I could be of help. I do my best to answer as many of those questions as I can, and I enjoy helping wherever I can. If you found the video helpful, please feel free to subscribe to this channel to make sure that you never miss any of the videos that we post. And you could also feel free to go ahead and hit that little like button. That will help other people to see this video, and hopefully it will be of help to them as well. And if you like, I have a little gift for you. If you head on over to themindfulnessedge.com, I'd be happy to give you free sample chapters of my book called The Mindfulness Edge. So until next time, I hope you are well.